Welcome back. In our last video, we asked a question that physics now forces us to take seriously. If biological systems, birds, plants, human enzymes can read quantum information embedded in the fabric of reality, could the human mind do the same? Could a sufficiently attuned mind occasionally sample from a probability landscape shaped not only by the past, but by the future? We said we'd apply that lens to one of history's most enigmatic figures. His name is Michel de Nostradame. And for 450 years, we have been reading him wrong. Let's begin with the critics. They're not fools. They point to things that seem like real problems. He predicted 1607, but Galileo was censored in 1615, 8 years off. He said 15 years between America and France, but it was only 13. His quatrains are so vague they could mean anything. These seem like fair objections. We should, however, deal with one thing here. He never claimed to be a prophet. In his preface to his son Caesar, written in his own hand, in the same year he published The Centuries, he states it twice, as if once were not enough. I do not wish to ascribe to myself the title and role of prophet. And later, I have eschewed the word prophet. I do not wish to attribute to myself such lofty title at the present time. And in a letter written in the final year of his life, 1566, he returns to the point a third time. Not that I am foolish enough to pretend to be a prophet. The critics have spent 4 centuries attacking a claim he never made. He was not claiming divine transmission. He was not claiming God spoke to him. He was claiming something more specific, more modest, and far more interesting. He called himself a prognosticator, a seer, a man who used a natural faculty. His word, natural, to perceive the shape of what was coming, not revelation, not prophecy, method. And this distinction matters enormously, because once you understand what he was actually claiming, the question changes entirely. We are not here to evaluate a prophet. We are here to evaluate a man who claimed a reproducible, technique-based access to information that should not have been available to him. That is not a theological question. That is a scientific one. And the critics, every single one of them, chose their own reference points instead of reading what he actually wrote. They imposed themselves onto him. They did not decode him. When you stop doing that, when you take him at his literal word, something extraordinary happens. The errors just disappear. And what is left is not vagueness. It is precision. Let's begin with Century 4, Quatrain 96. The elder sister of the British Isle will be born 15 years before her brother. By her promise proved true, she will succeed to the kingdom of the balance. The critics say that America was born in 1776, and that the French Republic was born in 1789. 13 years. Nostradamus missed. But notice what they did. They chose the dates. He didn't say declaration. He did not say revolution. He said birth. A declaration is not a birth. It is a claim, and in 1776, America was a claim backed by a desperate undersupplied army that nearly collapsed in its first winter. The birth required a midwife. France secretly became that midwife. Beginning in 1775, gunpowder, muskets, officers, money. Without French aid, the Continental Army likely folds. Nostradamus seems to have known this. He even named it. By her promise proved true. France's promise, her covert commitment, was what made America's birth viable. The moment that promise was proved true, the moment viability was demonstrated, was October 1777. The Battle of Saratoga was the first decisive American victory against a European power. News of Saratoga reached Paris and triggered France's formal recognition of American independence. The promise had delivered a living nation at last. As for France's birth, this was not 1789. 1789 was the spark. The revolution burned for 3 more years before the Republic stood on its own. 1792 is when the monarchy was abolished, the old order dismantled, and no foreign midwife was required. So the math is 1777 to 1792, exactly 15 years. Nostradamus was not off by 2 years. He was precise to the year once you read what he actually wrote. Then there is Century 8, Quatrain 71. The number of astronomers will grow, pursued, banished, books censored. The year 1607 by sacred gloams, so that none will be safe from the holy ones. Galileo Galilei, censored and condemned by the Church in 1615 to 1616. The critics say that Nostradamus gave us 1607, so he was 8 years off. Wrong again. Except they did not use the key. He said, by sacred gloams, par sacre gloams. This phrase points to a specific calendar tradition, one rooted in ancient Alexandria and still used today by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. The Ethiopian calendar runs 7 to 8 years behind the Gregorian calendar. 1607 is in the Ethiopian calendar. Add 8 years for the Gregorian calendar and you get 1615. He didn't just predict the event, he embedded the reference frame for the date and told you which calendar to use. That is not vagueness. That is engineered precision. From a man writing in 1555, 60 years before the trial. The common dismissal of prophecy is this: the predictions are so vague they can be retrofitted onto any era. Fine, then explain these. Century 3, Quatrain 55. In the year when one eye reigns in France, the court will be in very unpleasant trouble. The great one from Blois will kill his friend. The kingdom falls into evil and double doubt. In 1559, King Henry II of France lost the use of his eye when a jousting lance shattered through his gilded visor, and he died 10 days later. Nostradamus had already written the verse. A generation later, Henry II's son, Henry III, summoned the most powerful nobleman in France, the Duc de Guise, to the Chateau de Blois and had him murdered in the hallway. The French monarchy collapsed within the year. The title Duc de Guise became extinct. The Chateau de Blois is now a museum. A one-eyed king inaugurating a dynasty, his heir killing his rival at that precise location. Nostradamus named both in a single quatrain written 30 years before the second event occurred. This was not a vague prediction that could fit anything. It fit one sequence in all of human history. Some prophecies capture a single thunderclap. Others trace the arc of an entire life. Take, for example, Century 1, Quatrain 60. An emperor will be born near Italy who will cost the empire very dearly. They will say, when they see his allies, that he is less a prince than a butcher. Corsica, so close to Italy it barely qualifies as French. Napoleon spoke Corsican Italian at home, grew up in a family that resisted French rule. Citizenship by conquest, not birthright. Notice the title, Emperor, not King. Kings inherit thrones, emperors take them. And the verdict, less a prince than a butcher. No poetic flourish, a surgical description. He would rise not through royal blood, but through slaughter, and his allies would advertise it. Birthplace, title, cost, character, 4 precise markers, 1 unmistakable man. Now let's take a look at Century 1, Quatrain 32. The great empire will soon be exchanged for a small place, which soon will begin to grow. A small place of tiny area, in the middle of which he will come to lay down his scepter. In 1814, the Colossus collapses. Empire traded for Elba, tiny, insignificant. Yet Nostradamus adds the twist most gloss over, which soon will begin to grow. Elba was no final prison. From there he slipped free. The empire flickered back to life. The 100 Days armies defecting. Europe frozen in dread before Waterloo extinguished it. The quatrain sees both, the fall, the false resurrection, then the true end. Born on an island, first exiled to an island, then dying on an island. 3 quatrains clustered in Century 1. 3 islands, 1 life encircled by sea. Nostradamus did not prophesy scattered events. He wrote a motif, a man whose destiny was framed and confined by water. Some interpreters, restless for more, hunt Napoleon's name in Century 8, Quatrain 1, which says, Paul, nay, Laurent, will be more of fire than blood, to swim in praise, the great one to flee to the confluence of rivers. He will refuse entry to the magpies. Pampon and the Durance will keep them confined. They claim that Paul, Ney, and Laurent are to be rearranged into an anagram, saying Napoleon Roy, Napoleon the King. It looks clever until you examine it closely. First flaw, it introduces a contradiction. In plain text, Century 1, Quatrain 60 already names him as Emperor, the self-made title. Why encode him as Roy, King, when Nostradamus deliberately chose the other word? He doesn't trip over his own distinctions. Second, and most fatal, when you read the quatrain straight without forcing letters, it delivers something far sharper. To any 16th century reader, those three names screamed one place: the Béarn, birthplace region of Henry IV, first Bourbon king of France. It would be like naming Windsor, Eton, and Windsor Great Park to conjure a Corsican artillery officer. Nostradamus isn't hiding a name, he's pointing, with mapmaker's accuracy, at Henry IV. Then the judgment, more of fire than blood. Henry IV was no pure Capuchin flower. He was of a lateral branch, Bourbon. The direct line died out. France had no choice. The fleur-de-lis was never his by right. It was grafted onto him. His heraldry confesses it, the sacred lily of France, symbol of unbroken royal blood, bound in Navarrese chains. He was an outsider claiming the throne through war, not lineage. So he was more of fire than blood. And this fire indicates the religious wars that scorched France, the siege of Paris, the armies that abandoned him until he converted. The pure dynastic stream he could never truly join is indicated by the word blood. He did not ascend to the lily descended, chained to him. This is plain reading, no rearrangement, no borrowed letters, just Nostradamus speaking clearly, as he so often does when we let him. One life defined by islands, another by fire over blood. Two kings, two truths, one prophet. This is where the case against vagueness becomes something more unsettling. Nostradamus didn't just describe events. In several cases, he embedded the names of people who hadn't been born yet. For instance, in Century 1, Quatrain 25, we find the following: the lost is found. Hidden for so long a century, Pasteur will be honored as a demigod. Before the moon finishes her great cycle, by other winds he will be dishonored. Louis Pasteur, born in the year 1822, the man who revealed a hidden world, microbes that had been there all along, hidden for centuries, and was celebrated as a near-divine figure in his lifetime. The name is on the page. And the final line, by other winds he will be dishonored, anticipates the controversies over Pasteur's methods that emerged after his death. Controversies confirmed only when his private notebooks were opened by scholars in the 20th century, written 300 years before those notebooks existed. Then we come to Century 9, Quatrain 16. From Castile, Franco will emerge. The disagreeable ambassador causes schism. Those of Rivera join the fray and deny entry to the Great Gulf. Franco, the name is there. Francisco Franco, rising from the Castile region of Spain in the 1930s. But it goes further. Those of Rivera, a direct reference to the Rivera political dynasty, Miguel Primo de Rivera, whose dictatorship preceded and prefigured Franco's rise, and his son Jose Antonio, founder of the Falangist movement that became Franco's ideological engine. Without the Riveras, there is no Franco. Now the line, the disagreeable ambassador causes schism, refers to the Civil War of 1936 to 1939, which divided Spain like a wound. Then the line, deny entry to the Great Gulf, is Franco's refusal to allow Hitler's forces passage through Spain to Gibraltar during World War II, blocking the Axis from controlling the western mouth of the Mediterranean. 340 years before Franco was born. The name, the precursor, the schism, the gulf, all of it literal, all of it on the page. Now we come to the most discussed name in the entire collection, and the one the critics think they can dismiss. We find this in Century 2, Quatrain 24. Beasts ferocious from hunger will swim across rivers. The greater part of the region will be against the Hister. The Great One will cause it to be dragged in an iron cage, when the German child will observe nothing. The critics say Hister is merely the ancient Roman name for the lower Danube. Nostradamus was describing a river, not a man, near miss at best, coincidence at worst. Here's what they are missing. Braunau am Inn, a small Austrian town on the banks of the Inn River, a major tributary feeding directly into the Danube system. The town where Adolf Hitler was born in 1889. Nostradamus didn't choose between the man and the river. He chose both simultaneously. Hister is a double encoding, the man's name compressed into the ancient name of the river that runs through his birthplace. The geography is the name, because the ancient name of the river is not actually Hister. It is simply Ister, without the H. That is not a near miss. That is a signature. He says, beasts ferocious from hunger will swim across rivers. This is the Wehrmacht crossing river after river in the Eastern campaigns, ferocious, hungry for territory, literally crossing rivers as their primary military geography. And the greater part of the region will be against the Hister, the Allied coalition. Most of the world arrayed against him. The German child will observe nothing. The willful arrogance against the law and anybody who was other. Then the bunker, the willful blindness of the end. Then in Century 3, Quatrain 35, we find this. From the depths of Western Europe, a child will be born of poor people who will seduce a great multitude by his tongue. His reputation will increase in the kingdom of the East. He was born poor in Western Europe. He rose entirely through the power of his spoken word, and his reputation, his alliance, his reach extended to the kingdom of the East. Not Egypt, not the Middle East, the Far East, Japan, an actual kingdom, the dominant power of the East Asia, whose emperor was considered divine. The Axis alliance made Hitler a figure whose name was spoken with reverence from Berlin to Tokyo. But Nostradamus gave Hitler a second name as well, a mythological one. We find this in Century 5, Quatrain 80. Ogmios shall approximate Great Byzantium. The barbaric league shall be driven out. Of the two laws the wicked one shall yield, barbarian and Frank in perpetual strife. Ogmios, the Gaulish Hercules, the god not of physical strength but of eloquence. His power was his tongue. Men followed him not by force but by the compulsion of his words, bound by golden chains that ran from his mouth to their ears. If there is a single defining characteristic that separated Hitler from every other political figure of his era, it was not his military genius. His generals frequently thought him reckless to the point of madness. It was his voice, his ability to reach into a crowd and pull from it something that reason alone could not touch, to enchant, to blind, to make ordinary people feel they stood at the center of a cosmic destiny. Ogmios is Hitler's prophetic name for what he was. Hister is his prophetic name for where he came from. Now this word translated here as approcherà is a little vague. It can be translated as to draw near to resemble, to approximate. Hitler did not conquer Byzantium. It didn't exist, but he approximated it in his monumental imperial architecture, in his Cicero packed his self-conception as both political and sacred authority. In his occupation of the Balkans and southeastern Europe, where Byzantium once held dominion, in his construction of a state theology built on racial destiny and mythological identity, he gave his people what gods give people: an origin myth, a sacred enemy, a cosmic mission, and a promised 1,000-year culmination. He didn't merely use mythology, he manufactured a complete cosmological system and installed himself at its center. Ogmios, the enchanter through speech, the god whose power was the tongue, is perhaps the most precise description of Hitler's actual mechanism of power ever written. And it was written in 1555. It also says here that the barbaric league shall be driven out. This is the Soviets, ultimately expelled from the territories they had contested with Germany after consuming half of Europe in the process. The barbarian and Frank in perpetual strife. Barbarian, Russia. Frank, France, in perpetual grinding civilizational conflict. And of the two laws, the wicked one shall yield. This is referring to communism. Two names, one geographic, one mythological, one arc. Born poor in the West, seized power through speech, crossed rivers with ferocious armies, extended his reputation to the kingdom of the East, built an empire that approximated Byzantium, left barbarian and Frank in strife that echoes still. Let's take stock of what we've actually seen. Precise timelines, 15 years, exact when read literally. Calendar ciphers, the Ethiopian calendar key hidden in the French. Unrepeatable events, the one-eyed king, the one-off assassination, biographical arcs, 3 islands framing one life across 3 quatrains, embedded names, Pasteur, Franco, Rivera, written centuries before their birth. Double encoding, Hister as both man and river, Ogmios as the god of the orator's power. The critics were not wrong to be skeptical. They were wrong to be lazy. They imposed their own reference points and declared him imprecise. They skimmed and declared him vague. They dismissed without reading what was on the page. But when you read what he actually wrote, you find something that cannot be explained by coincidence. Precision beyond luck. Events beyond retrofitting, names beyond guesswork. Biographical arcs that track a single life through a recurring motif across multiple quatrains, islands, rivers, oratory that no random process could produce. And now the question, not whether he did it, the evidence has settled that. How? He told us in Century 1, Quatrain 1, sitting alone at night in secret study, it is placed on the brass tripod. A slight flame comes out of the emptiness. A brass tripod, a bowl of water, a flame, a specific physical ritual performed alone in the dark. Not prayer, not revelation, not God dictating words into a passive vessel. A method, a deliberate, repeatable procedure designed to induce a specific altered state of consciousness, a sensory on-ramp. In our last video, we proposed that certain minds, under certain conditions, might read quantum information from a probability landscape shaped by both past and future. Not supernatural, not divine, a natural faculty. His words, a cognitive attunement, like the bird reading the magnetic field, achieved through a specific reproducible physical practice. He was not claiming God spoke to him. He was describing a technique for quieting the noise of ordinary consciousness enough to read something that is always present but rarely perceptible. And if that technique works, if the brass tripod and the water and the flame and the solitude were an actual method for accessing what the quantum framework proposes, then we should expect to find similar methods in other cultures, other centuries, other minds. We do. 3,000 years before Nostradamus sat alone with his tripod, there was a man in the Hebrew prophetic tradition whose gifts were so consistent, so verifiable, and so precisely documented that he became the most cited prophet in the entire Jewish corpus. Not Isaiah, whose prolific output and convenient political timing raises questions we will address. Not Jeremiah, Elisha. In 2 Kings chapter 3 verse 15, we find that Elijah demanded, "But now bring me a minstrel." And it came to pass when the minstrel played that the hand of the Lord came upon him. He required music to enter his prophetic state, a specific sensory input, a deliberate ritual, a neurological on-ramp, separated from Nostradamus' brass tripod by 30 centuries and an entirely different culture, but structurally identical. What we now recognize as autism, with its heightened sensory attunement, its deep pattern recognition, its altered relationship to social noise and ordinary cognitive filtering, may not be a disorder that occasionally produces unusual minds. It may be the very neurological architecture that makes quantum field sensitivity possible. And the emerging research on autistic precognition suggests this is not speculation. It is a hypothesis with evidence. In our next video, the method, the minds, and the ancient record that connects them. Coming soon.